My name is Raymond Cooper, and I'm 73 years old, sitting here in the sterile assisted living facility in Salt Lake City, Utah, where I've been trapped for the past 8 months because my son-in-law, Dr. Marcus Webb, uses medical credentials to convince my daughter that I have dementia, fabricated false medical reports, and systematically gained control of my $2 million estate while forcing me to take mind-altering medications that make me appear confused and unstable. I am completely mentally sharp and healthy, but I'm powerless to prove it because everyone believes the lies of a doctor who has turned my own daughter against me to steal everything I worked 60 years to build. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comment below. And if this story resonates with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me shows how medical professionals can abuse their authority to exploit elderly people, and how family members can be manipulated into becoming accomplices in financial crimes against their own parents. Let me start by telling you who I really am, so you can understand how a sharp, successful businessman can be transformed into what appears to be a confused, dependent old man through calculated medical fraud. I built Cooper Construction from the ground up, starting with a single truck and a toolbox in 1975 and growing it into one of the largest commercial construction companies in Utah, with over 200 employees and contracts worth millions of dollars annually. For 50 years, I managed complex construction projects, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, supervised hundreds of workers, and maintained detailed financial records that required sharp analytical thinking and perfect memory. I retired 3 years ago at 70, not because of any decline in my abilities, but because I wanted to enjoy my golden years and spend time with my family while I was still healthy and active. My wife Dorothy and I raised 2 children in a beautiful home overlooking the Salt Lake Valley. Our son Michael is a successful engineer who lives in Denver with his family, and our daughter Jennifer is a nurse practitioner who married Dr. Marcus Webb 5 years ago. I was initially thrilled when Jennifer married Marcus because he seemed like a caring, successful man who provided her with security and happiness. Dorothy passed away from a heart attack 2 years ago, and losing her was devastating for our entire family. She had been the emotional center of our household, the one who organized family gatherings and maintained the close relationships that kept us connected. After her death, I struggled with grief and loneliness, but I remained mentally sharp and physically capable of living independently. Marcus positioned himself as a supportive son-in-law during Dorothy's illness and death, offering medical advice and helping coordinate her care. His professional expertise was valuable during a difficult time, and I was grateful for his knowledge and assistance. Jennifer was comforted by having her husband's medical expertise available during her mother's final months. After Dorothy's funeral, Marcus began expressing concern about my living alone in our large house and managing my business affairs without Dorothy's support. He suggested that I might benefit from having family nearby to help with daily tasks and provide companionship during my grief. At the time, his concern seemed caring and appropriate. Marcus offered to help me manage my financial affairs, suggesting that his medical background had given him experience with complex decision-making that would be valuable in handling investments and estate planning. He volunteered to review my legal documents, insurance policies, and business contracts to ensure that everything was properly organized and protected. I was initially grateful for Marcus's offers of assistance, but I made it clear that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs and didn't need help with financial or legal matters. I had been successfully running a complex business for decades and had no intention of relinquishing control of my assets or decision-making to anyone else. But Marcus became increasingly persistent in his offers of help, and he began pointing out minor incidents that he claimed were concerning signs of cognitive decline. When I occasionally forgot someone's name or misplaced my keys, Marcus would make comments about these being early warning signs of dementia that required monitoring and intervention. Jennifer began echoing Marcus's concerns, noting changes in my behavior and decision-making that she claimed were worrying. She pointed to my grief over Dorothy's death as evidence that I wasn't thinking clearly and might need additional support to ensure my safety and well-being. Her nursing background gave her comments medical credibility that influenced how I interpreted my own normal aging processes. I began to feel like I was under constant surveillance, with Marcus and Jennifer analyzing my every action for signs of cognitive problems. They would visit frequently and ask detailed questions about my daily routines, my ability to manage household tasks, and my understanding of financial and legal matters. Their attention felt invasive rather than supportive. The situation escalated when Marcus began suggesting that I should undergo cognitive testing to establish a baseline for monitoring any future changes in my mental abilities. He explained that early detection of dementia was important for treatment planning, and that regular assessments would help ensure that I received appropriate care if problems developed. I resisted these suggestions because I knew that my mind was sharp and that cognitive testing was unnecessary. I could still perform complex mathematical calculations in my head, remember detailed information about my business operations, and engage in sophisticated discussions about politics, economics, and current events. I saw no reason to submit to medical testing when I felt perfectly normal. But Marcus used his professional authority to pressure me into agreeing to cognitive assessments, arguing that resistance to testing was itself a sign of cognitive impairment, and that people with dementia often lack insight into their own condition. He suggested that family members had a responsibility to ensure that elderly relatives received appropriate medical evaluation regardless of their personal preferences. Jennifer supported Marcus's position, expressing concern that my refusal to undergo testing showed poor judgment and a lack of concern for my own welfare. She said that as my daughter, she needed reassurance that I was mentally competent to live alone and manage my affairs. Her emotional appeals made it difficult for me to continue, refusing their requests. I finally agreed to undergo cognitive testing, partly to prove that my mind was sharp and partly to end the constant pressure from Marcus and Jennifer. I was confident that the results would demonstrate my mental competence and put an end to their concerns about my cognitive abilities. The testing was conducted by Dr. Patricia Williams, a neuropsychologist who Marcus recommended as an expert in geriatric cognitive assessment. The evaluation included memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and detailed interviews about my daily functioning and mental health. I felt that I performed well on all the assessments and was confident that the results would confirm my cognitive competence. But when Marcus presented me with Dr. Williams' report, I was shocked by its conclusions. According to the assessment, I showed significant signs of early-stage dementia, including memory problems, poor judgment, and difficulty with complex reasoning. The report recommended that I be placed under medical supervision and that my financial affairs be managed by responsible family members. I was stunned by these findings because they bore no resemblance to my actual performance during the testing or to my real mental state. I had answered questions correctly, solved problems accurately, and demonstrated clear thinking throughout the evaluation. The report seemed to describe a different person entirely. When I questioned the accuracy of the assessment, Marcus explained that denial and lack of insight were common symptoms of dementia, and that people with cognitive impairment often believe they are functioning normally when they are actually declining. He said that objective medical testing was more reliable than my own subjective impressions of my mental abilities. Marcus used a neuropsychological report to justify taking control of my financial affairs and medical decisions. He convinced Jennifer that I was no longer capable of managing complex business and legal matters, and that family intervention was necessary to protect me from making poor decisions that could jeopardize my financial security. Jennifer, trusting her husband's medical expertise and believing the assessment results, agreed that I needed supervision and support to ensure my safety. She was genuinely concerned about my welfare and believed that Marcus was helping protect me from the consequences of cognitive decline. Marcus arranged for me to be evaluated by an attorney who specialized in elder law and guardianship proceedings. The attorney, Dr. James Morrison, reviewed Dr. Williams' report and recommended that Jennifer be appointed as my legal guardian to ensure that my interests were protected and that appropriate care decisions could be made on my behalf. I protested these proceedings and insisted that I was mentally competent to manage my own affairs, but my objections were interpreted as evidence of the cognitive impairment described in the neuropsychological report. The attorney suggested that resistance to guardianship was common among people with dementia who lacked insight into their condition. The guardianship proceedings moved forward quickly, with Marcus providing medical testimony about my supposed cognitive decline and the need for protective supervision. Jennifer reluctantly agreed to serve as my guardian, believing that she was acting in my best interests based on legitimate medical concerns about my mental state. Once the guardianship was established, Marcus gained effective control over my financial assets and medical care through his influence over Jennifer. He convinced her that I needed to be placed in an assisted living facility where I could receive appropriate supervision and medical monitoring. He also suggested that I needed medication to manage the behavioral symptoms of dementia. I was moved to Sunset Manor against my will, with Marcus and Jennifer explaining that this placement was necessary for my safety and well-being. They assured me that the facility was highly rated and that I would receive excellent care while maintaining as much independence as possible given my cognitive limitations. At Sunset Manor, I was prescribed a cocktail of medications that Marcus claimed were necessary to manage my dementia symptoms and prevent dangerous behaviors. These medications included antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and sedatives that made me feel confused, drowsy, and disoriented. The drugs created the very symptoms that Marcus had claimed were evidence of my cognitive decline. The medication regimen was devastating to my mental clarity and physical health. I experienced memory problems, confusion, and difficulty concentrating that were entirely caused by the pharmaceutical cocktail I was being forced to take. These drug-induced symptoms were then cited as evidence that my dementia was progressing and that I needed continued medical supervision. Marcus visited regularly to monitor my condition and adjust my medications, always presenting himself as a caring son-in-law who was working to provide the best possible care for his declining father-in-law. Jennifer trusted his medical judgment completely and believed that he was acting in my best interests even when I complained about the effects of the medications. Meanwhile, Marcus was systematically taking control of my financial assets through his influence over Jennifer's guardianship decisions. He convinced her that my business assets needed to be liquidated to pay for my care, and that my investments should be restructured to ensure long-term financial security. Each financial decision was presented as necessary for my protection and well-being. Marcus arranged for the sale of Cooper Construction, my life's work, claiming that the business was too complex for Jennifer to manage and that liquidating the assets would provide more secure income for my care. He also convinced her to transfer ownership of my house to a trust that he helped establish, supposedly to protect the property from potential nursing home costs. Through these financial maneuvers, Marcus gained control of nearly $2 million in assets while maintaining the appearance of acting in my best interests. Jennifer believed that she was following sound financial advice from her husband and protecting her father's estate from mismanagement or exploitation. I tried to protest these decisions and to explain that I was being drugged and manipulated, but my complaints were dismissed as symptoms of my supposed dementia. Staff at Sunset Manor were told that I had paranoid delusions and that my accusations against my family were evidence of my mental illness rather than legitimate concerns about exploitation. The isolation and helplessness I felt were overwhelming. I was trapped in a system where my protests were interpreted as symptoms, my clarity was chemically suppressed, and my assets were being stolen by someone who was supposed to be protecting me. Every attempt to assert my competence was used as evidence of my incompetence. I began to lose hope that I would ever be able to expose Marcus's fraud and regain control of my life and assets. The medications made it difficult to think clearly or maintain the energy needed to fight the system that was holding me captive. I felt like I was disappearing, both mentally and legally, while Marcus consolidated his control over everything I had worked to build. But something unexpected happened 6 months into my imprisonment at Sunset Manor that would begin to expose Marcus's elaborate fraud. I was visited by Dr. Sarah Chun, a geriatrician who had been hired by the facility to provide independent medical reviews for residents who were receiving multiple psychiatric medications. Dr. Chin was immediately concerned by the number and types of medications I was receiving, especially given that my medical records showed no history of psychiatric illness or behavioral problems prior to my placement at the facility. She began asking detailed questions about my symptoms and the circumstances that had led to my diagnosis of dementia. During our conversations, Dr. Chin noted that I demonstrated clear thinking and coherent reasoning that were inconsistent with the level of cognitive impairment described in my medical records. She began to suspect that my apparent symptoms might be caused by medication side effects rather than underlying dementia. Dr. Chin requested permission to gradually reduce my medication dosage to see if my cognitive functioning would improve. She explained to Jennifer that overmedication was a common problem in elderly patients and that reducing unnecessary drugs often led to significant improvements in mental clarity and quality of life. As my medications were slowly reduced under Dr. Chen's supervision, my mental clarity began to return dramatically. The confusion, memory problems, and disorientation that had characterized my time at Sunset Manor gradually disappeared, revealing the sharp, analytical mind that had always been there beneath the pharmaceutical fog. Dr. Chen documented these improvements carefully and began to question the original diagnosis of dementia that had led to my placement at the facility. She requested copies of the neuropsychological testing that had been used to justify my guardianship and began to review the evidence more critically. When Dr. Chen contacted Dr. Patricia Williams to discuss my case, she discovered something shocking. Dr. Williams had no record of ever conducting a neuropsychological evaluation for Raymond Cooper. The report that Marcus had presented as evidence of my cognitive decline was completely fabricated, created by Marcus using stolen letterhead and forged credentials. Dr. Chen immediately reported her findings to the state medical board and the law enforcement agencies that investigate elder abuse and fraud. Her documentation of my dramatic improvement with medication reduction, combined with the evidence of forged medical reports, provided compelling proof that I had been the victim of an elaborate scheme designed to gain control of my assets. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Marcus's fraud and manipulation. Digital forensics experts found evidence that Marcus had created multiple false medical documents, forged professional communications, and used his medical credentials to deceive family members and legal authorities about my mental state. Financial investigators discovered that Marcus had systematically diverted my assets to accounts that he controlled, using his position as Jennifer's advisor to influence guardianship decisions that benefited him financially. The sale of my business and the transfer of my property had generated substantial commissions and fees that went directly to Marcus or to entities he controlled. Jennifer was devastated to learn that her husband had manipulated her into participating in a scheme to defraud her own father. She had genuinely believed that she was protecting me from the consequences of cognitive decline, and she was horrified to discover that Marcus had used her love and concern as tools to steal my life's work and independence. The legal consequences for Marcus were severe and swift. He was arrested on charges of elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and practicing medicine outside his specialty without proper credentials. His medical license was suspended pending investigation, and he faced potential prison time for his crimes against me and possibly other elderly victims. The civil proceedings to restore my assets and independence were more complex, but ultimately successful. Jennifer voluntarily petitioned to have the guardianship dissolved, and I was able to regain legal control of my finances and medical decisions. While some assets have been lost or diminished during Marcus's control, the majority of my estate was recovered and restored. More importantly, I was able to leave Sunset Manor and return to independent living, with my mental competence fully restored and documented. Dr. Chen's careful work had not only exposed Marcus's fraud, but it also provided irrefutable evidence that I had never suffered from dementia or any other cognitive impairment. Today, 8 months after my liberation from Marcus's scheme, I'm living independently in a new home and slowly rebuilding a life that was nearly stolen from me. While I can never fully recover the time that was lost or the trauma of being chemically restrained and financially exploited, I've regained my freedom, my dignity, and my legal rights. My relationship with Jennifer is healing gradually as we both process the manipulation and deception that Marcus used to turn us against each other. She has expressed profound remorse for her role in my imprisonment, and she's working to rebuild the trust that was damaged by her husband's crimes. I've also become an advocate for other elderly people who may be victims of similar schemes, working with law enforcement and medical professionals to identify and prevent elder abuse that involves medical fraud and financial exploitation. My experience has shown me how vulnerable elderly people can be to manipulation by trusted medical professionals and family members. The experience has taught me that medical credentials can be used as weapons against elderly people, and that the combination of family trust and professional authority can create perfect conditions for exploitation. It has also shown me that recovery is possible even from the most sophisticated fraud, but only when brave professionals like Dr. Chen are willing to question authority and investigate inconsistencies. That's my story. How my son-in-law used fake medical reports to convince my family I had dementia and stole my fortune while keeping me drugged and imprisoned. But how one honest doctor exposes fraud and restore my freedom. Sometimes the people we trust most with our health and finances are the ones who pose the greatest danger. But sometimes truth and justice prevail, even when the odds seem impossible.